Bitcoin day in and day out, and I would sell Bitcoin day in and day out, and I would talk about its merits. And so it was interesting to see the ups and downs of the ICOs and the tokens. It was interesting to see the ups and downs of the hype mania, right? Everyone is just chasing hype up to the top and it all crashes. But Bitcoin is the thing that has remained, has been here since the beginning, and it continues to be here because it does one thing well. It's trying to be decentralized money. But as a product builder, Bitcoin kind of felt very distant from the product, right? Bitcoin on chain was cumbersome to use. It was not very friendly. It wasn't the fastest, right? Where it's what, 2014, 2015, you want speed, you want instantaneity, you want, we all live on the internet, right? I want to send a payment and I want to have it arrive. I can't wait 10 minutes for a block, or even potentially a lot longer depending on your fee, right? So I think that was one of the reasons why I remained sort of in my fiat job, if you will. I didn't jump on board fully because it still lacked a little bit of what I could bring to the table. As a software engineer, you know, there's various types of engineers, I'm sure all of us know here. I'm not a protocol level, low-level engineer, of cryptographer of that kind. So it didn't feel like the right time for me to jump on board. And then in early 2016, I discovered the Lightning Network white paper, and you know, the same folks that I would listen to and talk to and interact with and participate in bit devs with, those folks started talking a lot about the Lightning Network, and it wasn't even a thing yet, and they just kept talking about it. So I figured I should look into what this is. And you know, it's definitely not a simple 9-page white paper. It's quite in depth, and there's a lot of it that's deep cryptography. But the concepts around, you know, penalty transactions, the concepts around a payment channel, a web of payment channels, you know, the concepts around HTLCs and onion routing, really kind of clicked very quickly. And I immediately tested the early days of you know, LND 0.31 or whatever it was at the time, the very first implementations. And I remember testing that on testnet, and making payments and saying, okay, yes, this I can build. I think it was roughly a couple months later, maybe 4 months later, that I decided to, the Chain Code Labs opened their residency program for Lightning Network. It was the very first of its kind. And I applied, not really thinking that I had much of a opportunity to. I imagined there would be hundreds. I ended up finding out there were hundreds of applicants, but they chose 10 folks. And looking back, it's an interesting set of people. I think I mentioned this at the,
wow,
you know, the,
10.
Yeah, it was only 10
Were
people.
they all Americans? No.
No. I do remember that you had to be present in New York, or you had to be able to be in New York. So that was a big, hard requirement, right? They had to be in the room. But it's an interesting set of folks now looking back, because, you know, there's myself, Jack Mallers from Strike was there, Justin Camarina from Bitrefill, who leads all of their crypto operations, was there. Rene Picard, who ended up writing the Mastering Lightning Network book, was there. Pierre Rochard from Nakamoto Institute and Kraken was there. So it's really sort of this like big, you know, big bang that exploded, and everyone sort of learned from the best of the best. And so through that experience, I sort of decided this is it. You know, I really understood money at the speed of the internet. I love that phrase because it means so much in so few words. And so I sort of took the leap and quit my job and started on the path to trying to build something out of that. Maybe I'll stop here. And Marina, where do you want me to take this? And should I keep going? I'm just talking right now.
Why? So I just posted the link for the white paper. If they haven't read it, they should, obviously. Si no han leído el paper, ya lo puse en el chat. Número 2, Andre, why games? Why gaming? Is that how it started, or what was the I guess, the trampoline moment, if you will?
Definitely. So for those who don't know, the reason why she's asking about games is my company. So in late 2019, I co-founded Zebedee with two of my co-founders, Simon and Chris. And our premise is we are a next generation fintech company, and we build infrastructure and applications for both developers and gamers. So game developers and gamers. And so the idea is, if each of these virtual worlds out there, World of Warcraft, Fortnite, with V-Bucks, right? World of Warcraft with gold. You can imagine all of these mobile apps that have gems and golds and silvers and coins and it's all fake money, right? But it's all real economies, but it's fake money that is generating a real economy. Right, and when I say fake money, is that it has no value. It has no value outside of that one single world that it's in. So you can't take your V-Bucks from Fortnite and spend it elsewhere, right? It would be fine. It would be more fine if there was a way for you to put $5 in there, and then you can take $5 out of there. But you can't, right? Because it's a unidirectional flow of value. You can only put value into the ecosystem. You can never very easily take it out. That's why there's things around like secondary dark markets for accounts for games and assets and all of that, right? So our thesis is that, and it's interesting because myself and my two co-founders arrived at similar hypotheses in different ways. Simon, my CEO, comes from the financial services background. Chris, our head of R&D, comes from the game development background, and I come from the systems and architecture background, product development background. And so we all kind of understood that Bitcoin is eating finance, and it's eating everything relating to finance. But that's just the first facet. If we're relating it back, if we compare it to the internet, right? The internet in the early days was about sending data back and forth. Right now, it's about streaming 8K video games across the world. Someone in Japan is playing a game that's being hosted in Europe or the United States. That's so much bigger than what was imagined at the time. And so for us, it's okay. Bitcoin is eating finance. What's next? It can't stay as just trading. It can't stay as speculative. It must move forward. And so what's the next industry that's going to get disrupted by this? And for us, gaming made sense because it's a younger demographic. It's a younger audience. Most people are already digital. They were born on the internet. There's no world without the internet for these folks. Everyone has iPhones or Androids. Everyone's super highly connected, and they inherently understand the value of digital points. Right, a point system already exists in all these worlds, whether it's a like or whether it's a gold coins used inside of a game. So it made perfect sense to introduce these folks, this world, to the reality of Bitcoin, but at the same time solve their problems by introducing Bitcoin. It's not just about Bitcoin. It's about how can Bitcoin make it better, make it easier, make it cheaper, make it faster. So that's what Zebedee does. We provide the APIs, the SDKs, the tooling, the developer dashboards, the apps for gamers and game developers to use Bitcoin inside of their games, whether it's rewards, whether it's in-game economies, whether it's, it's entirely up to you to define. So that's the first vertical. That's the first big industry that, in my opinion, Bitcoin will thrive. And then, in a couple of years, we'll see what the next one will, and they're all moving simultaneously, right? We're seeing e-commerce growing a lot. There are companies targeting that. You're seeing even point-of-sale systems growing. So Zebedee's focusing our efforts in the gaming and general online virtual environment ecosystems.
So I have a question. The way I learned about this as well was from Marguerite, who put the 4 Bitcoin into her puzzle. And then I know Desiree, who's doing Thunder Games. Like there's a few women, because I don't know if you know, I wrote an article about women in crypto and how they're working in the space. And so these were some of the stories that really hit me in the start about how the world is changing. How do you see it changing? Because obviously there's 20,000 games. Like who are the demographics that you've reached? Is it in Africa? Is it in Latin America? Is it Americans? Like what's the age range, and what kind of games are being played with the tools that your platform provides? Like what are the things that you find super interesting about what you've been able to enable, if you will? Sure.
So it's interesting because given that Bitcoin is global, our demographic is actually very dispersed. And so Zebedee has an app. So our app brings in customers and gamers by itself, but the large majority of the users that come to us are gamers that have played a game that happens to have a Bitcoin reward or a Bitcoin aspect to it. And so what that means is wherever the gamers of those games are, they tend to come to Zebedee simultaneously. So there are pretty big user base counts for, countries like Philippines, India, Brazil, what else? I think in emerging markets it would be like, those would be the top three. And I think, of course, the US, EU, and general UK, I guess, are the other three big pullers. So it's really both. We get to see both the emerging markets as well as the what they call tier one in fintechs and video games. So I would say one story that I like to tell is sort of tries to encompass what it all means. So we have, in the early days of rolling this out, we created Infuse. Infuse is our integration into Counter-Strike. So if you've ever played Counter-Strike, CSGO, we introduced a plugin that allows any, in this case, we're hosting the server, and anyone can join and play, and Bitcoin is involved in that game. So you have physical coins in the middle of the game. So if I, destroy you, I can take your coins, and your coin is like your life. So it creates this survival mechanics, and it's sort of very much skin in the game. And that was a hit, right? We're talking about hundreds of matches a day. And we just kept playing, and we started doing tournaments in the early days, and the idea was just to showcase what is possible with the technology, right? Like, here's a AAA titles game with Bitcoin that's actually running it works, and so forth.
Type the name of the game so that we have it here and they can look it up later.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Zebedee Infuse Counter-Strike. And so the idea was to foment like the imagination. What can you build with all of this? And as it turned out, in Lightning specifically, we're talking about nano transactions, right? Really, really micro transactions, 0.5 cents of something, right? One Satoshi, potentially 1 millisatoshi. And what that means is transactions are micro, so there's a lot of people that may think that the impact of these types of technologies and transactions remains micro. It's like, okay, microtransactions doesn't move much money, it's not very impactful. That's actually the complete opposite. The transactions are micro, but the impact is macro. Folks that our user base in Brazil was very active during the early days of our tournaments in Counter-Strike, and they were earning relatively sizable chunks of Bitcoin at the time. And Bitcoin was not only, Bitcoin grew in and of itself, but also over time, folks were able to accumulate enough Bitcoin to go out and pay for rent, to go out and buy groceries, to go out and buy medicine, to go out and pay for bills, right? So, and they would go on Twitter and take photos and like hashtag Zebedee, thank you. We didn't really do it. Does that make sense? We didn't do it. They earned it themselves. It was, we had sponsors, we had advertisers, it was a whole environment. But the fact that the technology could enable that, the money that flowed around was just like data.
Champions,
and that,
I love it.
And exactly, and the money worked in Brazil, right? That's the important piece. It didn't stay in the world of Counter-Strike. It exited that world into the real world and said, I'm valuable here too, because I'm a digitally native money. So that was really, really impactful, and we keep seeing this with every new release that comes out, with every new technology, with every new game that gets introduced to our technology. There's always a little bump, some new country or jurisdiction comes into play. Recently India was the big one that we had a game developer release a title, and we got a lot of Indian users with their own customer support problems, right, with their own difficulties, and we learn a lot about the jurisdiction and try to guide the user towards their Bitcoin journey, because this is just the beginning for them, right? This is just the very first interaction with Bitcoin.
Wow. Can I ask you, because obviously a lot of people who were, I mean, as you know, in El Salvador, the law suddenly changed, and, we may have heard about Bitcoin, about crypto, about blockchain, but it was a very sudden change. And what you may have read in the news was more like Axios and play to earn and those sort of things. Can you tell them why this is different and how you see, like, I think even in Brazil, the the women that I love with crypto in Brazil, they are now Bitcoin only. Like some people have exited and then come back. But also what did it mean for you to have a Bitcoin and a Lightning only project? And then how was it different from the Axios promise of wealth that obviously has not worked out so much?
You mean Axie Infinity, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think from the get-go, for Zebedee at least, there's a big difference between, I like to try and separate the overarching crypto markets that everyone likes to bundle into one. I think there's money and then there's technology, right? And I think Bitcoin is money. It's the closest thing we can call to money. I actually think it's much more than money. It's a network. It's a protocol. It's so much more. We don't have a word for what Bitcoin truly is. Right now, it's money. But if you really think about it, the rest of the stuff, and I'm just going to simply call it the stuff. The rest of the stuff, it may have its merits in some way, shape, or form when it comes to a technology advancement, when it comes to a technology breakthrough. I'll give a very clear example. Zcash. Zcash is a fork of Bitcoin that introduced this notion of a zero knowledge proof, right? It's like you can prove that something exists without knowing what that something is. It sounds like magic cryptography. It is. If it wasn't for the fact that Zcash exists today, we wouldn't have advanced the field of zero knowledge proofs as we have in general. And it's now being used across many other industries outside of cryptocurrencies, right? So
Agreed.
Are you telling me that that was the loss and Zcash's money? No, personally, I don't see Zcash as money. Money is a construct. You can define that to be your money, and that's perfectly fine. We don't define that to be money. For us, Bitcoin is money. Zcash is technology, right? It has different use cases, different capabilities. We don't see it as money. Money for us has always been Bitcoin, and that's primarily because of some really strong properties that we can go on and on about, right? But it's really the notion that it is not owned, right? It simply is. It just exists. It's a thing. It's like the internet. No one owns the internet. You have these huge internet service providers, I guess, but no one owns, like, it's not a thing that you can own. So it's inherently a technology, and technology is amoral. Technology doesn't pick sides. It doesn't prefer blue or yellow or green or black. Like it literally picks nothing. It just exists, and you get to use it to your heart's desire. So for us, Bitcoin was an easy choice. It was actually something that we together defined. We want to advance Bitcoin, and we think there are many more use cases for it. It's assuming the early days of the internet and saying there's more use cases for the internet. We're trying to find out what those are. We believe there's use cases here. What can we do? So the reason why, so to your first question, then the reason why it's different, we power infrastructure. So Zebedee does not build games. We may have a game or two where we have built as an indie game developer just to showcase how the technology works. So, if we go to a conference, we may showcase a bunch of games built on Zebedee, but also here's a game that we built specifically for the conference to showcase a very specific mechanism, right? So we've done those types of games, but we don't really build games. We are not a studio. We build infrastructure and products. So APIs, SDKs, developer dashboards. What we do is we facilitate payment and transactions and transferring of value inside of any environment. That's very different to the Axie Infinity and other models, right? There's this notion that whereas we are powering value transactions in games, those were actually creating games out of, complex job-like ecosystems, and economies maybe. And they seemed like games, and they looked like games, and they were, very colorful like a game. But in its core, it really, like, a lot of these systems were primarily economic incentive structures that would lead to the growth of the early ons in the play, right? So the earlier you were to the game, the more you had to win, or the upside for you is much larger. And that invites it's sort of like it invites others, right? So if you're winning, then you invite others, and then others want to win, so they start winning, and then you invite others. So it creates this colloquial Ponzi where everyone is winning because there's always more people coming in, and then the second there's no one else coming in, everyone starts losing because there's nothing here, right? It's a facade. And then you couple that
pyramid,
with,
right? En Latinoamérica hablamos de la pirámides.
yeah, exactly. And then you couple that with the notion that a group, a company, is able to issue a money, right? They basically decided, okay, we are going to raise X million dollars on a public sale of a token, and that makes it priced at, I don't know, $1 for one token, whatever the exchange is. So they just created that out of thin air, right? There's no reason for that value to that money, but they have it. And then they deployed that entirety of that value into this economy. So you create money out of thin air, and then you put it in an economy that generates a lot more. So the early investors, the early ICO holders have made significant sums, as have every other Ponzi scheme participant or creator, right? I don't think that's news. So I think there's a very large difference between what that is and what they were attempting to do versus what we're attempting to do. We're trying to bring a bidirectional value flow where the money that's used in these environments is the same money that exists everywhere. And we're just the pipelines to facilitate it, right? So it's quite different, and I think the longevity of one is seen pretty clearly, right? You look at the numbers of Axie Infinity right now, and there's virtually, it's non-existent. Whereas I would argue our numbers are not cyclical, right? They don't move. If the market is hot, people are playing games. If the market is cold, people are still playing games, right? So we don't move with the crypto hypes. We are a business, a long-term enterprise level business that's providing services to enterprise systems. So yeah, does that make sense? Like, it's quite a different offering, yeah.
So, what I work a lot with companies is the pitch deck, right? What are you doing? Like, give me your elevator pitch for the company. But in this case, you just raised a ton of money. Congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
Like, what was your 5-second pitch of these are the 5 ways that we are succeeding, and this is how this is going to be successful 2 years from now? Like, if you had an investor in front of you, what were you saying to them so that they see how this is money, so they see how this is valuable? And then closing question for you that I will let everybody else ask you is, you have to tell me the story about how you got on top of the stage at BitDevs New York and what that meant, just so they can you share it.
Yeah, absolutely. So man, I don't know that I can do the 2-minute pitch, but I can definitely highlight the
Awesome.
few things. So it definitely, it depends on who your audience is, right? Of course, if we're coming into an investor that is not does not know Bitcoin or does not know Lightning Network, right? I think
Let's say Mickey Malta or Chamath Palpicia. Mickey Malta.
So I think the first thing that we like to say is we are here to solve problems for customers. That's the only reason why one builds solutions, because there are problems and you build solutions. So initially, the way we see it is Bitcoin is inherently better technology. You simply cannot send any money in the current financial system for less than 60 cents, right? That's infeasible. It really, in cash, 25 cents is actually easier to trade in cash than it is digitally. What that means is the entirety of that spectrum of low value transactions is completely ignored in digital. And then if you add transaction fees, card processing fees, banking fees, anything gets, it really hits your accounts. It's 50% more, 30% more. So Bitcoin is inherently, through the Lightning Network, is inherently better technology. It allows for feeless scales. It scales with the network's needs, and feeless microtransactions at scale for literally the entire world. It is a decentralized peer-to-peer network. It's not something, which means it's resilient. It's not something that will stop one day because there's 2 participants in the network. So having that understood, that Bitcoin actually provides capabilities that are simply not possible, right? It's the new stuff. knowing that, what we do is we provide the ins and outs for APIs for developers to use to power their economies, their rewards, their points with Bitcoin. What we've seen is, and we can share plenty of case studies, developers that use, for example, ad revenue models, which right now is very prominent. So you have a game and then you have a little ad every so often. What they've seen is by introducing Bitcoin rewards, by introducing, let's give 10% back of our ad revenue back to users, retention has gone skyrocketed 4x, right? The return ROAS, the return on ad revenue, on ad spend, in some jurisdictions has gone up to over 187%. Introducing Bitcoin rewards to a simple game, quote unquote, introducing a play and earn. It's not play to earn. It's a play and earn environment, and a bidirectional flow of entertainment and value has led games to become profitable, right? So I think that is a very, very important piece. Our technology provides the ability for games to better monetize themselves. This is something that is notoriously hard in the gaming industry. So that would be like the very simple 2-minute. There's plenty of other reasons, right? But I think that the big thing is we make you more economical as a game, as a developer, right? We're able to power that. So at scale, you can imagine a multinational corporation that spends $30 million in fees because they're trading from this currency to this currency to this currency to pay out. Imagine using one single currency that spits out and they save $30 million in fees. At scale, these things really ramp up. So yeah, so that was the first one. What was the second one? Sorry. Oh, the story.
And what is the no big deal thing? Obviously,
yeah,
the big number one thing here going on with you guys.
Yeah, so maybe I'll tell the story of BitDevs and then I'll round it to NBD. So in early 2017, in my discovering the Lightning Network days, I learned about the BitDevs New York, which is a Socratic seminar environment for Bitcoin developers or enthusiasts or just Bitcoin lovers, people that want to learn about Bitcoin. And it was a meetup, and I went and I sat in the back, on the side. I'm a developer, and I was very comfortable as a developer, but a very senior developer. But Bitcoin is a monster. It's very complex. If anyone ever tells you they know Bitcoin 100%, they're lying. And so what I think is important is I was kind of removed. I was kind of shy. I was kind of intimidated a little bit, but I sort of just took it in, right? Just listen. And at the very end, I remember that there were 3 people at the front sort of running the show, and I remember that they were so I don't know if the term is inspiring. There's just like, oh wow, there's this admiration, like this is very interesting. They know so much, right? They really know this technology, and they can really talk about it. And so and that's sort of a passion of mine, is being able to demystify a very complex topic and then bring it down to something that's understandable. And so, which I think is what product development is taking these complex systems and making them accessible, right? So to me, at the very end, I literally just went up to the stage and I thanked them for having me over for this meetup. But I immediately asked, and I said, who gets to choose to sit in the front? Because there were 3 people and there were maybe 50 of us sitting watching, and they couldn't really give me an answer. It's one of those things like, well, we're the organizers of this, that's why we sit in the front. But so and then I asked the second guy, which was another person in there and sitting down, and I said, who gets to sit in the front? And he also didn't have a great answer. And so at the end I basically said, look, I'd love to sit in the front, like I want to sit in the front, so how do I sit in the front? And so we kind of talked a little bit.
This was your first meeting?
This was my very first BitDevs, yeah. And it was this sort of like, I wanted to teach, to educate, but also just like, I wanted to be in the front so I could make a difference. And that was sort of the made potentially the kickoff where I said, all right, like this is the leap, let's go down the rabbit hole. It was maybe 6 months later that I got the Chain Code Labs residency, which sort of steamrolled into all of this that's happened in my life. So then that was very marking. It's like an anecdote that I like to tell because it's very impactful and it's so simple, right? They don't even remember at the time. So that, what has that led to? So as Marina talked about, we just, a couple months ago, we released 21. 21 is similar to Torgo's Dev. We also have our Chain Code Labs style seminars. We've been teaching people about Bitcoin and Lightning. We also support developers with grants. So developers that work full-time in Bitcoin and full-time in software development for the open source Bitcoin, for the open source Lightning Network, we are able to fund them with money, right? So they can work full-time for this. So we're actually going to be announcing our second grantee in next week, which is very exciting. Just last week it came out that our grantee Bruno, who it seems like you guys have met him, is someone that has pushed a lot of code to Bitcoin Core and has improved the testing coverage. Is someone who's directly impacting the infrastructure of Bitcoin. And so Vinci does this, and we continue to improve, and we'll continue to raise funds to help developers. So Zebedee is a for-profit company. It builds with Bitcoin, it builds on Bitcoin, the network, right, and on Lightning. And Vinci educates about Bitcoin and aims to fund Bitcoin development. But the other side is really the notion that Bitcoin is open source. And at its core, really what it always is Bitcoin is just open source code. It's nothing else, right? It's just code. And it's really the willingness of everyone to run this code and support it and put money towards it and build hardware for it. So what we did is Zebedee released a open source initiative, a nonprofit called NBD, which stands, so ZBD is our company, Zebedee, and NBD is sort of a play on that lettering, and NBD stands for no big deal. It's meant to be funny. It's meant to be a kind of a joke, because the idea is we are releasing open source software for Bitcoin enthusiasts, Bitcoin developers, Bitcoin users, and it's always open source. It's always free to use. It's always free to take it and build actual companies and products and services on top of. You can make money by yourself if you want to build a platform on top of our software. And the idea is it's things that Zebedee can't use. It's things that Zebedee can't really pursue. It's things that we would like to do, but it doesn't really make sense from Zebedee as a for-profit company. And so, like I said, Zebedee builds on Bitcoin. Zebedee builds with Bitcoin. NBD builds for Bitcoin, right? We just build software for Bitcoin, for the goodness of the protocol of the network. And so just recently we released 4 products. I can go in depth in those. I'm not sure if I should, but 4 products on hosted channels, and they were all open source about Lightning Network as well.
Do you have a link to the release where you mentioned the 4 products so they can also learn more about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that way they can read it in depth instead of.
Yeah, I'm sending it right now.
Because they know that we do some learning by doings. And so there might be a chance that we can bring this back at some point and go in depth at that point.
Definitely. Sounds great, yeah. And so NBD is this project of ours, right? It's a way for us to work on open source code and put things back into the community as much as we take in. And this is all because maybe it's all because of that one initial BitDevs meeting where it really inspired me. Look at all these people, so different, so unique, and they're all going for the same purpose. We're all working towards this better future that we all think exists, which is powered by Bitcoin, which is enabled by Bitcoin. So that was maybe the one that clicked and things turned around. Yeah.
Pues André, I'm going to open this up to the floor, and I think Ishi and a couple of people, if you want to raise your hands, I'd really appreciate it. And bienvenido, gracias. Allá está Luis y Milton, so I'll let Luis start.
Thank you. My question for you is, what is your favorite platform to develop your apps or the software that you talk about?
You mean in general, like what sort of programming languages and environments like that?
Right.
Yeah. I can tell you a little bit about my stack and then how Zebedee has evolved, right? I built the first version of Zebedee for everything, and there's still a lot of my code in the system. Hopefully not a lot for longer, because we have people who code better than I do now. But our applications, when you're starting a startup, it's important to marry, it's never going to be perfect, and software is always evolving. So it's a matter of like, how quickly can you provide the most minimum viable product, MVP, in a way that is still able to push through like the main functionalities of the system, right? Like the main value proposition. So for us, we chose to go with React Native for the mobile apps, and the idea is we can write the code base once or almost once, right? There's maybe some changes here and there, but we're able to target both iOS and Android devices, right? So we save a lot of time in doing that. Are there things that maybe could have been better by not choosing that and going with a fully native iOS app and a fully native Android? Potentially, but it's very small, right? So you kind of have to make that change. Either you code the app twice and you need 2 developers, 2 resources, a lot more money, or you do it once and you kind of get that way. So React Native for the apps. Myself and my the founding engineers of the team were very versed in TypeScript and Node.js, and so that was the initial version of all of our services. But we have since evolved into a lot of Go, a lot of C#, and what else? C#.NET, Go, TypeScript, and Node.js. Yeah, so those would be like the 4 primary like back-end systems that we use, and then in front end it's a lot of React and a lot of React Native as well. Does that answer the question?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Thank you so much.
Milton, go
Yeah, no
ahead.
problem.
Good night.
Hey.
Congratulations. Sounds very, very interesting, because if you are a good gamer, when the game ends or the game, you can be richer people, or
Exactly.
you can be a poor people too. So you don't know how you don't know how to trade your money. You only have to play game. Okay, so it's very interesting. I have two questions. The first is, do you use a new protocol to manage all of the transactions inside the game, or do you use Lightning Network?
Yeah, so Zebedee provides both the Lightning Network layer. So if you want to make transactions in the Lightning Network from one player to the other player and vice versa, you can do that. You can also do it internally. So if you don't want every transaction to go to the Lightning Network, you can do that internally to your game. And then at the end of the match, you can sort of like settle, and then you can say, okay, here's the payouts, right? And people can receive their funds. It's really up to the developer, though. We don't define the games or the gameplay. We just provide, here's the quote unquote money pipes, right? So put the pipe wherever you want it to do. If you want the money, the pipe in the game, that's up to you. If you want it just in the ins and outs of the game, that's fine as well. We can do both. We didn't create any specific protocol for doing that. It's up to the developer how they would want to interact with it.
Okay, and the second question is, what is the programming language that you use to write the API that the game used to manage the transaction?
So the Zebedee API is a RESTful HTTP-based API. So we have SDKs for different environments. So we have a Node.js SDK, we have a Unity SDK, I believe we have a Go SDK as well. So we can, because it's HTTP-based, it works virtually everywhere, right? So it works in the back end of a game server. It works in the back end of a platform. It works in the front end of a website. So it works everywhere. We, like I said earlier, we have a lot of Go, a lot of Node.js, a lot of C# in our systems, and a lot of React in the front end. But it's really up to the game developer. We have developers building on Unreal. We have developers building on Unity. We have developers building on Python. It's really you pick your poison. We just provide sort of like the ins and outs for you to power that experience with Bitcoin without having to worry about having Bitcoin, without having to worry about Lightning Network, right? You sort of just use it, make payments, without having to think about that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Bruno?
Thanks. Hello, Andrew. Nice work. I was reviewing a little bit about the platform right now. I have some question. I see that the platform provide a method for create rewards to the players. If I made a game for mobile devices and publish that on the stores, Apple Store, or the Google Play, Um, I will not have some trouble with the payment method that they have, like Apple Pay. Is permeated with the politics of this
Yeah,
store?
that's a great question. So first of all, the technology doesn't only work in mobile, right? It works everywhere, desktop, console, mobile, etc. But 60% of gaming these days is mobile, right? So yes, to answer your question, there are no issues with games powered with Bitcoin to go to the stores, but there are limitations. And so I don't know, there would be issues, right? It's more like you can't do A, B, and C. So the first things you can't do is Apple Store is more prohibitive and limited than the Google Play Store. Google Play Store is a little bit more anything goes, whereas Apple Store is very rigid and walled garden. So you will have a lot more freedom in the Google Play Store. In the Apple Store side, what happens is if you're paying in to a game or paying into an application, that's called in-app purchase, right? Like the inflow. You're bringing money from the outside into the app. Apple needs to take a cut. It's part of their rule set. If you try to bypass that, they won't allow it. So what happens is mobile games right now, they're powered by Zebedee, don't have a pay-in mechanism. That's also because of the Apple Store, right, rules. So they usually don't have a pay-in mechanism. If they do have a pay-in mechanism, it happens on the web, which is, sort of separate. What happens is they have a payout mechanism. They have rewards. They have gems. They have coins that, become Bitcoin. It's worth Satoshis. And so the rewarding has absolutely no issue with the Apple Store, the app stores. The only concern that Apple may have is this very specific rule that they have, which is this notion of cash for tasks. So you can't create a game and call it a game, but really what you're doing is paying someone to do a job, right? Which is sometimes called like play to earn, which is you pretend you're not really playing a game, you're just doing a task so that you can earn, some money at the end. The reward has to be random. The reward has to be won. It has to be like skill-based gaming. You're winning a reward because you're good at it, not because you clicked a few check boxes and completed a task, right? So apart from that, rewards are perfectly fine. We have, there are over, I believe now there are over like 12, 13 games built with the Zebedee app that are live on the app stores right now, both Google and Android. And, I can put a bunch of links for those as well, and you can check them out.
Do, please.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks.
Thanks, Bruno.
Actually, give us, what's the biggest headache you've had that you didn't even imagine was going to be a headache with something like what Bruno just asked you?
So I think it's really the fact that it's a monopoly, right? It's really not even a situation of does the market want it to be more open? Because usually it's a situation where, okay, the market will dictate. If the market wants things to be one way over time, there's going to be enough pressure and then it'll lead it that way. But it's now been multiple years, I want to say 4+ years, that Apple has been in being sued and in court and litigation by giant companies like Spotify, Epic Games, and all of these are suing them because of the closeness of the platform. So I didn't think it could it would change so quickly and so drastically. So what they recently announced doesn't really impact us because we don't do NFTs, we don't do any of that stuff, but the gaming industry does touch NFTs, right? That's something that comes up a lot. And Apple just decided that if you're going to do anything relating to it, we need to take 30%. That sort of changes a lot. So
high.
Yeah, the notion that the kings of the castle can introduce a tax out of nowhere, right? It's a little bit like, So I guess we were expecting less drastic changes so quickly. I understand they are gatekeepers, and we understand that they have their needs and they want to monetize. But because of the monopoly state of how the Apple Store works, they can do as they wish. And most likely what's going to happen is they're going to introduce this 30% tax, and then whether it's next year or the following, they're simply going to come out with Apple Bitcoin Wallet, which is the only wallet that will work with their system, right? And then all of a sudden they created a monopoly on Bitcoin. So it's not great, and we don't love it, but you got to play the game. And so a lot of what we're doing now in our BD efforts is going after potentially non-mobile based games. It's esports tournaments, it's esports titles, it's AAA titles, it's console games, right? And trying to infiltrate that market as well. When it comes to mobile, a majority of them are hyper casual or idle games, so Candy Crush style games, Angry Birds style games. All right, so those are pretty famous and you know, rake in millions of users. But really, we need the World of Warcrafts, we need the Fortnites, which move lots of more money, right? So yeah.
So I have a question regarding what you just mentioned about the Fortnites. Like, I remember that you transfer like the skins in the game, and it's all about the stability of the tokens. And obviously, Satoshi's Bitcoin is not necessarily stable. And Galoy, for example, which is strong in El Salvador, has been mentioning something about a stable Satoshi of some sort. Like, what do you think about that, and how do you see that transforming, you know, your games potentially?
Yeah, I think stable coins is the hot topic, right? I love how they found a way to make the term fiat coins more sophisticated. Stable coins. It's really what it is. It's just a synthetic dollar. It's nothing more. So I think there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of value in a money that doesn't fluctuate, right? Everyone can agree to that. So if you're in a position where the exposure that you have to Bitcoin is outsized to the risk appetite that you have, so if you're willing to fluctuate 20% day in, day out, that's your choice. If you're not willing, having the ability to interface with a dollar-like currency that doesn't move so much is really important, right? What we've found is that if you are in a trading environment, if you are in a financial services environment, that is extremely important, because you're trading, you need to hedge against it. You need to, you know, I make a trade, I win some, I'm going to put this on USDC and I'm going to keep it, and then I'm going to trade it. So you want that stability. The gamers and the game developers aren't really seeking that. What they really want is easy ways to move money that is in dollars to Bitcoin and vice versa. They don't necessarily want to hold a stable coin because it's not very usable, right? So it really depends on the target demographic and the industry that it is. In a world where, you know, you have a stable coin that is everywhere, that's a different world, right? I don't think that's where we are now, and maybe it'll be the future, but I'm not betting on that one. But for now, what I think it is, you know, folks like Galoy, they're solving for a very different problem than we're solving, right? And they're trying to build this community bank system software that is, you know, half open source, and a lot of it is based on this notion of giving people the tools they need to use Bitcoin in a friendly way. Stable sats is their introduction of like a synthetic, I believe it's derivatives-based, you know, stable coin. So you kind of have you have both sides. You have a put and you have a long and a short on Bitcoin, and so you kind of hedge the fluctuation of Bitcoin. I'm definitely not the best person to go in depth on this. I think there's a lot of merit to stablecoins in general. I think depends on the customer segment. For gamers, it hasn't really been a big request, but I think once we, you know, Bitcoin has been stable as stable as it gets, right? We've been sitting at 20 for a long time. So if we begin to see fluctuations of wide percentages again, maybe that will come back and people will say, hey, it'd be great if Zebedee had a stable coin. And then maybe we'll evaluate, right? But again, it goes back to our point. For us, it's the new capabilities that Bitcoin brings, and stablecoins don't bring that. That's not what we're about. We're trying to introduce new capabilities. And if you'd like to, at the ends of it, you want to bring in dollars and then use Bitcoin and then cash out dollars, maybe we'll provide that, right? But you may not need to have a stablecoin in the middle. For us, the Lightningt works extremely well, and it's still so early. I think it'll blow people's minds in a couple of years.
Unbelievable, André. We have your Twitter. I think they all have it. I guess if you could multiply yourself and be 20 Andres, what project in Lightning would you like to see move forward, whether it's related to privacy or, I don't know, what project that you've seen that you wish the community would pay more attention to, or perhaps that they could potentially add value by adding some reviews or commenting?
Sure. I think there's never enough eyes on Bitcoin Core in general. If you're interested in reviewing code, testing things, the best way to learn a software is to test it. So if you're into that, there's never enough eyes, and there's always work to be done there. It's a bit sometimes intimidating, but it's there and it's available. And I'm happy to connect you to anyone that may make sense. When it comes to more Lightning, which tends to be more approachable, I think if you're looking to work on protocol level things, maybe picking up these bugs, right? So I don't know if you were aware, but the recent bugs with LND, for example, read about that bug, like understand why that bug happened, go in depth on it.
The
Someone
Turkish
did that.
dev, right? The Turkish dev?
Yeah, Barack, yeah. If you think about it, the second bug was found because someone was investigating the resolution of the first bug, right? So really, take the time to read through that and get involved and see how those Lightning Network implementations work. I'm going to toot my own horn here, but we released the software called Cliche, which is a Lightning Network node. It's called a Cliche like this. It's a Lightning Network node, but it's meant to be a light Lightning Network node. So you don't need to run your Bitcoin Core. You don't need to run everything. If you're just testing, if you're just developing, you just want to say, npm start Cliche, you want to start app, right? You're still just testing. You're still developing. You're not really running a large scale infrastructure. So that node, that software allows you to do that very, very easily. You can run it in your machine very quickly, and it sort of like gets things going. There are some concepts that I think are interesting in Lightning that are maybe worth pursuing further. I think the notion of being a private Lightning user is very hard these days. People may think it's actually the most, private, specific, private-centered network, but it's actually not. There's lots of heuristics that can be, gathered and sort of patterns that you can create. So Lightning privacy is big. We also have these notions of different types of channels that are coming out. So we came out with the notion of hosted channels, which is a Lightning channel that is a trusted environment that can do different things, has different properties. There's the notion of zero conf channels, which is a Lightning channel that can be opened immediately, and then later on it can settle on chain. So I think that the advancements of the Lightning Network is really interesting, something to look into. If you're looking for just your first way to get started, maybe look at the open source Lightning wallets out there. Zeus wallet, Blixt wallet, Blue wallet, Galoy. I imagine a lot of that stuff is open source too. Look into those and maybe talk to some people and find their initial issues. What are good issues to look at? And every single bit counts. Like I want to emphasize, if you're just fixing documentation, that goes a long way. If you're just changing the text, correcting text all over the website or all over the application, that goes a long way. You don't have to introduce the biggest Bitcoin feature for you to make an impact, right? You can come in and get going, and over time you can rake up that sort of contribution level. So for me, it's just get your hands dirty, find something that seems a little bit interesting to you, and just get your hands dirty, try it once, try it twice, maybe it's not your thing, you move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing until you click, right? And I think that should be the goal.
O sea, jala la silla y también pregunta cómo te puedes sentar adelante en la mesa, ¿verdad?
Exactly.
Milton has one last question porque André se tiene que ir. Si alguien tiene más preguntas, por favor escriban en el chat y lo podemos dejar irse a dormir porque acá ya es bien tarde. Go ahead, Milton.
Okay. What do you think about the job opportunity for the Rust programmer in the crypto environment?
Rust, right? You said Rust?
Rust.
Yeah. Rust is everywhere, man. Everyone keeps talking about Rust. It's Rust. It's the hot new new technology, the hot new programming language. We have been dabbling with Rust. We haven't done too much, and I think it's because we don't have someone who's calls themselves an expert in Rust in our team. If we had, we would feel a little bit more comfortable putting, Rust-based software in production. We don't have that expertise, so we haven't gotten there. I think in crypto in general, there's a lot of Rust-based systems. In Bitcoin, they are starting. But to be honest, like I can't speak to each individual type of developer at this stage. Like I said, we don't hire Rust developers, so I wouldn't know 100%. I can tell you that, unfortunately, the reality is that, Google is laying off, Stripe is laying off, Snapchat's laying off, Twitter's laying off, right? So we are in an unfortunate situation where around the world, large corporations are laying off, but at the same time, you have companies like Zebedee, like other companies that are up and coming and they're high growth startups and they're growing tremendously, that are hiring. It's just, at different levels, different pay grades, different capabilities. And so I don't think being a Rust, let me rephrase, I think being a Rust developer in the broad crypto industry is great, and I think there's a lot of job opportunities. But potentially outside of crypto or potentially outside of the hot technology things right now, it may be more complicated, right? We're seeing pretty big layoffs around the world, which is very unfortunate. So I'm happy to connect anyone with anyone that is in my network, if it makes sense, for job opportunities as well. Look at Zebedee jobs postings. We have a careers page. See if there's anything that sparks your interest. We're happy to talk as well. But yeah, whenever we want to hire some Rust developers, I'll make sure to let you know.
Well, but also
Okay.
contribute to no big deal, no? Like start there,
Yeah.
perhaps as well.
That's a great idea. Yeah. So something that we value a lot is, if we're, as engineers, if you can do the whole proof of work, right? How do you prove to me? So we're all remote. Everyone's remote in Zebedee. So how do you prove to me that you're good, you're a go-getter, you're ambitious, you can actually do your work? A lot of the times it's through side projects. A lot of the times it's, interview questions and so forth. Open source software that you can point to or contributions that you've done goes a long way, goes a very long way. So whether you're just getting started and you push a bunch of code to the NVD projects because you're helping and you're doing this shows to us that you have the ambition, the purpose, the drive, and like you're a self-starter. No one is, saying, hey, 1, 2, time to do work. You're doing it because you want to. You're doing it because you feel the need to. That is very impactful. So if you want to get started by introducing support for that, I think that's something that's really cool. And there's a lot of open source software out there, including NVD. The last, so I see the two questions. I can quickly answer them. So do I think it's possible to create a metaverse in Bitcoin? Metaverse is a term that means everything and it means nothing, right? It's misused. It's sort of like AI. It's just blockchain. It's like big terms. The true metaverse really is when everything is interoperable, right? You want to exit your game and go to your TV and then go do something on another virtual environment and another virtual environment, and you want to be the same person, the same identity. And so you want to be the same individual in all these worlds. That's what the metaverse would be. Every world is connected to one another. In order for that to occur, what you really need is interoperability. That's the most important thing. It doesn't matter if my avatar here works, but then over here it doesn't work, and then over there I look like a dinosaur, and then over here I'm another type of person. That's not the metaverse, right? Like those are not connected. And then if you talk about identity, that's one piece. The other piece is value, money. If my money in this metaverse A is different than my money in metaverse B, that's not a metaverse. Those are just advanced worlds that have like slightly more capabilities, but they're not a metaverse. The metaverse is kind of like saying the internet. The internet works because everything is interoperable. The same websites that you access in Japan and China and Russia and Brazil is the same stuff you see in the US and UK and India and any other place. So the money has to be the same. The technology has to be interoperable, right? So yes, it's possible to build. In my opinion, you need Bitcoin to build the metaverse, a metaverse. And then Rust or Solidity. I understand Solidity is the ETH EVM language and Solana and so forth. I'm not very versed in Solidity. To be very honest, I think there's a lot of job opportunities there too in the general crypto space. So if that's your bread and butter, there's a lot there. When it comes to Rust, I'm a little bit more versed, but like I said before, I'm not sure, what the market holds right now for those two types of developers. We don't hire those two, so apologies if I don't have more insights.
Pues André, thank you so much for your time. We're gonna let you go sleep. We really appreciate your perspective as a Latinoamericano, as a South American compatriota, And also a builder that is innovating, but also understanding that you need to build the pipelines before we can create the different highways. So we really appreciate that you're bringing that perspective, because we see this as like, okay, you can only contribute to Bitcoin Core, or you can only, you know, do X, be a cryptographer. And you show us that you can build, you can create, and you can show that entrepreneur spirit. And I think in a country like El Salvador, it is really key for us, so that it doesn't seem like this thing out there. It's really much closer, and you're a representative of that for us. So we really appreciate your time and dedication. And whatever you're doing with Vitium, keep us in touch.
Absolutely.
And I already told Lucas, let us know if you want to get in touch with a couple of corporations. So we'll be in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been an honor. You know, my hope is that it, you know, inspires and it gets people to go out and do their own, you know, pursuit of Bitcoin. I ended my recent talk at TabConf at the keynote, and the last slide was ask not what you can do for, ask not what Bitcoin can do for you, but what you can do for Bitcoin, right? Like, see this as an opportunity. Bitcoin is going to be, it's as impactful, if not much more, than the internet. This is just the early stages. We're like 10 years in. There's a lot more to go. Just imagine what the world has been like with and without the internet, and the last 30 plus years have been giant, magnificent changes for the world. So get involved, get your hands dirty, you know, get off your seat, go to the front and sit in the front of the talk. Yeah, so thank you for having me. This is great. I appreciate it.